Okay, well, I'd like to dive into a poem. I see you have your book here. Before you select the poem, just tell us a little bit about the book.
It's a unique book. I came across a picture of my father playing at the Philadelphia Zoo in the monkey cage. You say to yourself, how the heck did this happen? Well, Dad was a jazz pianist and he had music studios on Broad Street in the Schubert building, which is now the Miriam. And he had an agent who called him up and said, let's do some PR. You'll move the piano into the monkey cage to see how beasts respond to your music.
A little scary, isn't it?
Evidently, Dad wasn't scared at all. He said, let's do it. So he bought a brand new upright, had it put in the cage, was dressed in a coat and tie and hat just like men did in those days, right? But so were the monkeys. They sat on his lap, he began to play, and they began to play. However, one of them caught a glimpse of himself in the veneer of the piano and reached for it and started to scratch it, and the two monkeys got into it. They started pulling the piano apart. They were ripping the keys off, throwing things around. They took my dad's hat, they were wearing my father's hat. And they destroyed the piano.
Oh.
And that's exactly what the people who came to interview Dad afterwards said. They said, were you scared? He said, no. They said, my God, your poor piano. Dad said, hey, it's worth it because you just put me on the front cover of the Bulletin and the Inquirer. I wanted to do something and dedicate it to Dad. So this book is in 3 sections. The first section, well, it's called Nocturnes and Aubades. And a nocturne is a night piece.
Right.
And it's a more serious, musing piece of poetry or music. And so they're more solemn poems in the beginning. This third and last section are Aubades, and that's when you wake up to a bright dawn, you're going to have a good day. You greet the dawn with prayers. This goes back to the Greeks. And I have an in-between section, which is all about classical music, dedicated to my father, who had equal love of jazz as well as classical music. So, if I may, I'll read a poem dedicated to my father.
Okay.
This poem is called A Sweater After Death. I put on my father's sweater and lose my hair and grow a belly. My fingers fly over piano keys, hardly knowing what they're doing. And I'm making a living and facing big responsibilities. I cannot get the sweater off, no matter how I pull. And I feel death of a loved brother too soon. And I feel the grasp of a mother who knows no distance. Then the sudden surge of a wife's love softens me. The sweater falls away, and my new knowing of you, Father, is packed away tenderly in that third drawer.
I'm assuming that the sweater is not made up, that the sweater is a very real and tangible piece.
Right, but what happened to it is made up.
Okay. Yeah. So a good example of what we were talking about earlier.
Start with something tangible and then let it rip. Yeah.
No pun intended.
Yeah. And I think we're always trying to get to the root of our parents, and we've gotten to an age where we say, why didn't I ask them then what I want to ask now? And you just weren't mature enough to do that. So there are a lot of things we miss. And I'd love to question him. I mean, there's one story, fortunately, I got out of him before he did die. And he died well into his 80s, both he and my mother. They had a very good friend who was their dentist, but this guy back in the 20s loved jazz. So he invited my parents to a session. Well, when my parents walked into this guy's luxurious apartment, I mean, he was a well-to-do bachelor dentist, which sounds funny. It was all dark. And all they saw was this dot of light being passed around. Well, it was a reefer. And everybody was sitting in a circle, puffing and passing it on to the next person. My parents were never smokers, so I guess they pretended to inhale. Like Bill Clinton, right? When the lights came on, one of the smokers was Bing Crosby.
Oh, wow.
So it was a kind of musical thing, because this guy dealt with musicians and housed them when they were coming through, doing a gig somewhere in Philadelphia. But Dad always told that story. The innocent Bing Crosby, Mr. Straight, who sings about White Christmas, he was smoking.
through the years, you know, you heard stories where it really was the jazz people that were the first to explore things like smoking reefer.
And went on to other things,
Yeah.
like Coltrane and Burt Parker and stuff, yeah. It destroyed some careers and others thrived.
Yeah, the rock stars weren't doing anything new.
Exactly. And aren't you amazed that they're in their 70s and they're still performing?
Yeah.
Yeah. You never know. You never know.
Now, you said your father was a jazz musician. What instruments did he play?
Strictly piano.
Strictly piano?
He'd go out and play a single gig, or he might have a small quartet. Like for a while, he had these music studios on Broad Street, and he would go over to the Bellevue Stratford and play their luncheon hour with a quartet and play semi-popular, if not classical music. So he just ran the gamut. When he was a little kid, his mother walked him down the street to the silent theater, hand in hand, put him at an organ, and he played background music for silent films. This is 6 years old. So obviously he was a protege.
Do you have any recordings of your father's?
We have a couple 45s. He was on the cusp. I wish he could last a little longer, to get on tape and so on. I think my one son, taped a few of his things, but no introductions or anything like that. He just rambled from one song to another. He was in Ripley's, believe it or not. He was able to play like 1,000 songs straight, and he was timed for several hours. Not as official as Guinness, but he made Ripley's, that he could memorize songs and play them hours on end.
Earlier in a conversation, you had mentioned travelogue poems.
What happened a few years ago, I used to keep a journal on the trips my wife and I would take. And then one year, I was getting a lot of poetic stimulation, so I wrote poems down about the trip. And after we got home, I thought, this would make a good sequence. So I'll just call this one blah, 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 1, blah, 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 2. Pretty soon I had 8 poems that were all about our travel in Israel. And I guess I got a mindset, we get into certain things and we work with it, right? You write a certain kind of poem. Mike writes a certain kind of poem. For a long time, you can go through that. It's sort of like going through your blue period, then your pink period.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So every time we take a trip, it just seems to come out this way. That I'll write a series of linked, or can make them linked because I'm seeing one thing contiguous to another. If it's in Israel, we go to one mountain, and then we go to Haifa, and then we go to Jerusalem, then we go ride a camel or whatever. Well, they're all connected in a way because the commonality is Israel.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way they've turned out.
Yes, for someone like me that doesn't really travel very much, I've always been intrigued by poets that do travelogue type poems.
Well, I have a poem here that is about when we were about to get on a boat in England, and we were in an inn, and we realized that Jane Austen used to go to dances in this inn. It's called Jane at the Southampton Dance. And again, this is basically true about her, and then I had to imagine some things about her, and then I put myself into it and try to give it a history. Jane at the Southampton Dance. German bombs falling. Timbers of Tudor houses fed the fires that reshaped the tumbling blocks of Georgian buildings. Yet some structures were spared, like the Dolphin Hotel. Walk through its archway with emplastered stone walls. Inhale an indefinable odor of antiquity. Here, Thackeray wrote in a room viewing just gulls on a pebbled roof. Here, Queen Victoria stopped to water her horses. Here, 200 years ago, 18-year-old Jane Austen came to celebrate her birthday and enter the assemblies she attended many times in the room with bow window and soaring ceiling. Poised in a stiff-backed chair, was she the shy one with downturned eyes? Or a fiery flirt who drove boys away with her razor brain, her whip of wit?
I love the ending, the conflict of her personality.
Mm-hmm. And we have to guess at that too, because we don't know what the real Jane was really like except through some of her letters. And some of her major female characters might have been her or might not have been. Again, the writer, the creative person, bending the truth to make whatever she's doing good or better.